All right, so thank you everyone for joining us for this listening post. Today, our listening post is going to be led by our Time, Talent, and Treasure Committee, Doug Dunham, Tim Hagen, Brent Gerber, Kim, I just blanked on your last name, Kim? Westholter. I was thinking of her son, Zach. We had a great time on the mission trip together. Kim Westholter, and then Rachel Moen is also part of this group. And so they have put together a great opportunity for us to learn and listen and have a voice in what comes next. So, my joy is to open us in prayer and then sit and listen and learn with you all. Let us pray. Almighty God, you have called us to labor in your vineyard, and without you we can do nothing. Grant your gracious presence at this meeting, that what we do will build up your whole church. Let your Holy Spirit govern and direct us, that we may consult together peacefully, pleasing you with all we say and do, through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Amen. All right, Time, Talent, and Treasure team, thank you for your leadership.
Okay, good morning. Thank you all for attending. I'm going to just be a short introduction, and first I'll introduce myself. I'm Doug Dunham, and I joined Trinity 6 years ago, give or take a month or two. And the reason we chose Trinity, we had searched around different Lutheran churches in the area when we moved to this area, and one morning I woke up and without my wife's approval or anything, I just headed out the door. I said, I'm going to go to a different church today. And she said, okay. And I didn't give her enough time to get ready or anything, but anyway, so I left here that day, and I was completely impressed with the warmth and the welcoming atmosphere of Trinity. And since then, my son Mark and his now wife got married here. Recently, my only grandbaby, Haken, got baptized here. And it was all a blessing. And my daughter-in-law said something about Trinity that stuck with me, and that is how she said it was, it's a good mix of tradition and energy. So then I was elected to council. It was during tumultuous times. We dealt with COVID. We dealt with the building project. We lost one of our pastors. We lost our pianist and organist and our choir director. And all seemed hopeless at that time. But and it was in that second year, I believe, when I was on council and Tim was the president. And he initiated the idea a couple of times about reviving the stewardship committee. And after thinking about it long and hard and prayerful consideration, about a year ago we started to meet, and we went through a lot of information, and we still are going through a lot of information. We're learning a lot about Trinity, and we decided to, stewardship refers to financial management, and so we decided to broaden our focus a little bit to time and talent as well, because we need all that in our community, and a great community we have, but we need all that. And so the TTT committee came from our treasures, our time, and our talent. And I'm going to add one more T on there, and without their approval, I guess. But so I'm going to say our time, talent, and treasure team rather than a committee. Anyway, so we've already introduced the other members of the team, and we do have room for more, and it is a fun committee, believe it or not. There's a lot to learn, and so our agenda today is we're going to spend a little bit of time recapping Better Together, the campaign that we had. We're going to share a financial update and then take any comments, feedback, questions from you, and we'll try to get you out of here on a timely basis. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Tim Hagan.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Tim Hagan, and my most troubling thing last night is I was trying to figure out how long I've been a member here. I think I got it figured out. It's 38 years. So I think what I like most about Trinity is hospitality is one thing, and it's such a welcoming community, and that's an awesome thing to have here, and I've seen it grow and evolve over the last 38 years. So, highlights. The Better Together campaign was an effort to kind of raise funds for our building project. What we had done is obviously gone out, tried to get pledges from people, and we got a $1.45 million in pledges towards the beautiful addition that we have. With the help and investment of Trinity into the future and the support of our community, we actually hit the goal and raised a little over $1.6 million with Better Together. And Roger passed out a sheet that kind of spells out how those funds came in and where we're at. So if you want that detail, that's where you can find that. And I personally want to thank each and every one of you and the entire congregation. We did an amazing job. I mean, it's awesome. We raised over what we pledged that we were going to do, because Trinity is a very giving congregation. So give yourselves a round of applause for that. Thank you very much. So the total project, we had gotten approval from the congregation to go to $3.3 million, and we came in just under budget on that. And I do have the details of that from Sean May of exactly what we paid everybody. So if you're interested in that, I could definitely share it, but I'm not going to pull it up on my phone and read through it in detail. So the mortgage that we have remaining sits at $1.66 million, that's a realistic thing for a church our size, for a congregation our size. That's something that I think we can easily take care of and get knocked out. The mortgage is now part of our capital expenditures. It's now part of our congregational budget. It's no longer something that's set aside. It is something that we now have to make, just like when some of us are younger, you make a mortgage payment. I'm still making mine. So that's now just part of what we have to do. That's an obligation that we have. So overall, we did a great job of getting this built. I know that it was trying. I know that it was difficult, but it's a beautiful addition. It's welcoming. We have storage. We have room. We have all these things that we can now work off of. We have great offices that we can counsel with people and meet with people as they're starting off their faith life or struggling in their faith. So the business and the operations of Trinity now has to continue going forward. So we have a mortgage to pay, and we have other expenses that will continue to grow, and now we need to do the ministry of Trinity for the community and what we have going forward. Does that cover it? Perfect. So I'll turn this over to Brent.
Kim is also our technical consultant today. I don't trust myself to run the clicker. I'm Brent Gerber. You all know who I am. I've sung here we've been members of Trinity for 10 years or so. And that membership has only strengthened by being part of both this Talents and Treasures Committee, the Call Committee, and the Church Council. I'm also on the Church Council. And the reason that those committees are important to me is they remind me how important building our relationships here within the walls of this community are, but also provide some vision for building those relationships and activities outside of these walls as well. The work is ongoing, and because I'm on the council and have been able to follow the financial review month by month in our financial statements, I'm going to try to share some information with you, because I think in terms of the context of the building fund, it's important to kind of know where we're at. Plus, we talked about at the annual meeting being more transparent and open and sharing more information with you and that financial report other than just once at the a year at the annual meeting. And halfway through the year seems a good time to do that. I do want to thank Ryan Hill back there. He helped us to kind of consolidate down to a single page these financials, and every speaker tells you should never hand the handout out because nobody will listen to you anymore. And I promise I'm not going to go through all of that in great detail, but we are going to highlight and emphasize a few things that are in our financials so far. First of all, I want to talk about that column that says, well, let's see, we'll get through that. Eventually, you're going to see a budget column. I want to just give you a little background on how the budgeting process here at Trinity has worked here to date. And that is, we ask all of the committees to submit to us what they think they need for the year. And generally speaking, without much review or pushback, we kind of accept that and say, if that's what you need, we're going to come up with it somehow. We, I think as a council, are really having serious conversations about including more discussions about the revenue side, about making those budgets, because in reality, most of those budgets never get spent in full. So when we compare how are we doing to budget, we're not necessarily really looking at a realistic expense budget. And so we're going to be starting the budget process earlier, and we're going to be trying to include giving on the side of the budget so you can watch for that going forward. So a lot of times I'm going to refer to last year rather than to the budget amount, just because I think it makes more sense. So Kim has the balance sheet up here. This is what our financials look like in terms of the assets of the church. And obviously, you can see that the largest asset we have is our church building. And it's an awesome facility. We've had so many events here. My daughter's wedding was here, the Thorsgaard funeral. So many people commenting on what this space out here does in creating a front door from our church to the community. I want to call your attention to a couple other things. You see our savings and checking numbers. Still healthy. We have had to dip some into savings, but not to a catastrophic level by any means. The other thing I do want to point out is designated funds. Designated funds are funds that the congregation members give to, and they're earmarked for specific items. Some of them are accounts where maybe parents pay into for a youth trip and then the money is spent out, so it's a temporary fund. Others are more long-term, and amongst those is our building fund. But it's interesting to note, for the most part, those are funds that we really can't spend until the committees request something specific or something unexpected. So we actually have more of those funds than we do of our own liquid funds for paying operating expenses. So it's interesting to note, and we'll go through those in a little bit more detail as we go further. As Tim mentioned, let's see. I want to look about giving. So let's go to the sheet that you have in front of you. Oh, here's my, I guess I'm gonna have to do it. I'm gonna have to do it, aren't I? Now, you can't read this. Maybe you can make this just a smidge darker in here. But if you go to, where do I want you to look? I want you to look at giving. So if you look at giving, go across, Bill. So actual giving, there it is. So our actual giving is 282,000 versus or 262 versus 242. So actual giving for the year is up from where it was last year. You know, that's a great effort. But if you look at total giving down below, you see this number 403 versus 441. That's largely the difference is building fund contributions are down from where they were last year because most people have wound down their contributions to that pledge, and so that's completely understandable. If we go to expenses, we go further down to expenses, I want to particularly look at that capital expenditures account. Whoops, I'm pushing the wrong button. There it is, down here. You see that our year-to-date expenditures are $180,000. Over here is the budgeted amount of $202,000. So they spent a good chunk of the budget there. But last year was $1.3 million. Well, that's because all of those building expenses and stuff were just included. So it makes it very difficult for us to do year-by-year comparison because so much of that building stuff was in there last year. Next year it will be a lot easier to track. The point is, if you took those expenses out, those capital expenditures out, our actual amount of expenses for the year are $330,000. That's not on your sheet. $330,381 compared to last year's expenses for those same things of $338,009. So we're spending less. What's the point of saying that? Any budget issues we have are really largely still hangovers from the building expenses, not the fact that we've got committees just spending like drunken sailors, okay? So we, as mentioned before by Tim, I want to also emphasize that the loan payment of $11,176 that we have every month is part of that capital expenditures account in the budget. Interest and principal are both budgeted within that category, okay? So those are being paid out of operating expenses, not out of the building fund, okay? The final payment to Olaf Anderson in January was $68,755. That amount was actually added to the mortgage by the Finance Committee in anticipation of possible additional expenses. So it wasn't paid out of our operating expenses, and it wasn't paid out of the building fund either. It was added to the mortgage amount. But when Sue does her transactional entry, she has to run it against something, and so that was in that capital expenditures account that we talked about. So at least part of that budget number looking bigger than we maybe expected is because that amount was added on there. It didn't come out of cash on hand, it went to the loan, okay? So some of it's just accounting fuzziness, and I can't explain for accounting fuzziness. Those of you who are accountants in the room, I apologize. And another thing that did happen during the year, there was about $33,000 of furnishings expenses. That wasn't really accounted for anywhere, and we had money in the building fund. So early in the year, the church council approved paying that out of the building fund. So that theoretically should make that budget amount look a little better because that capital expenditure account had budgeted for that expense, okay? So, whatever, okay? So today as we sit, I don't know if you have that, we'll talk about it in a little bit when we get to designated funds. We have a remaining amount sitting in the building fund of $63,664. And there's really only a couple thousand at most of additional expenses coming our way towards the building, okay? Remember, we're not making payments out of that building fund. It's a designated fund, and it's kind of just sitting there, right? So we have to decide, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna proceed with that building fund? Let's go to the assets, if we could, or the designated fund slide. I think that's next, Kim.
Yep, this one right here.
Oh, that's right. I have this sheet. Okay, this is really small and it's really whatever. But this just gives you an idea how doggone many designated funds we have. We have, believe it or not, a designated fund called undesignated. So we as a council, I mean, there's some of them have very little money in them, and we just need to go in and clean up some of them. But you see, of that $285,000 of funds that are sitting there, some of them are in small little funds and pockets that we don't really have any use for. Maybe an emergency will never come up, but you know, so some of those we need to clean up, and we're going to work on some of those things. But again, one of those funds is the building fund. If you go back to the slide, Bill, of the income statement, if we add up all the giving and everything else, we get down here and it shows, you know, gain or loss of $107,513. Some of that's accounting, you know, depending on where the budgets were and all of those, what was added to the loan, we could debate the validity of that number, but let's accept that that's $100,000. That can be kind of troubling. It seems like a big number. It seems like, my gosh, we're never gonna be able to do this. In our work in the Time and Talents and Treasures Committee, we've done a lot of research kind of identifying how engaged are people. And one of the indicators of engagement is giving. We have 290 giving units in our congregation. If you divide $107,000 by 290, that's $370 a piece. So the job isn't insurmountable here. Our position looking forward, our giving is growing. There's an opportunity for us to do things. We do still have money going into the building fund. And in some ways, now is kind of the time to start thinking about maybe those contributions I was otherwise giving to the building fund, I should start moving over to the operational fund, because that's really where the building expense is being incurred in that mortgage payment, okay? But we're gonna talk about that as we flip to the next part of this presentation. So the building fund was set up with the intent to collect money towards the building costs, right? But again, the mortgage expense is classified as from that capital expense account of operating expenses. We do still have people giving. In fact, we have some people who the only place they give money to is the building fund. I think the building is really, really important. But I also think we have a lot of ministry to do that's independent of that building. And if we focus just solely on getting our building paid off as quickly as we possibly can, we run the risk of letting our guard down and not doing the work that God intended for us to do in the community and in the world. So that would be my first piece of thought I would share with you. So we got 63,000, we still have some money coming in. Roger points out, hey, we still got building fund envelopes in the box for those who picked them up and used those. So what do we do with those? Time out. I just remembered one really, really important thing back on your income statement that I gave you that I skipped. And I'm just gonna do that quickly. Look at what giving was in June. It's not very good, okay? Wasn't very good. So I urge all of you who listen to the recording or whatever, we can't take summer off for our giving, and maybe there's another way we can keep that consistent by online giving, other ways that you can set up regular deposits for your giving. We just, down months just cause us to go into savings. Okay, boom, sorry. I just had to get that out. Last thing, so then let's talk about the building fund. And this is really where we're looking for your feedback. We just don't really know what's the best way to proceed here. So one of the things we could do is take we do have an account for improvements and repairs to the church. That's a separate budget item from the, fund from the building fund. That's a designated fund, I believe. So it's not like we need the building fund for ongoing building expenses, but there are a few options we could have. We could we'd close that fund and then just transfer all the $63,000 back to the general fund so that we could pay those $11,000 monthly payments. That's one option. Another option might be to just take all of that $63,000, apply it all to the principal of the loan. Okay? That certainly helps us, cuts our expenses, but it really doesn't lower our payment, and it really doesn't benefit us till the end of the loan term, really. Okay? I mean, obviously we want to pare that down, we want to get paid off as much as we can, but that can be a possible issue. Another thing we could do is just leave it open, maybe make the mortgage payments out of the building fund. Everybody could kind of differentiate their giving on a building versus operational expenditure. There's a lot of different possibilities, and I guess we're really looking from all of you to give us some guidance. And I hope that I didn't bore you to death with all these numbers, but rather kind of directed you to be able to see the big picture of where this all fits together. Anybody have any comments you want to make about that? There's one in the back.
I have a question. Hold on a minute. What? Oh, I think, can I talk loud enough? No. My question is, what?
It's on.
What is our interest rate on our mortgage?
I don't know. 4%?
4%.
The banker speaks up, thank you.
And monthly is, so monthly, what do we?
Well, on a loan,
Principal?
yeah, remember on a loan, if you when you all bought your house, you made the mistake of looking at that total amount of your payments, and it was a lot more than you thought it was. You gotta remember, in early years, it's a kind of a declining balance thing. So your loan is highest when you first start making payments, so thus your interest is a lot higher in early months. But as the principal balance goes down, so does the amount of interest in each payment. So right now, the vast majority of our payments are going towards the interest on the loan. What? No.
No?
No.
So most of it is going for the interest on our.
Correct. Well, go ahead, Steve. You're the banking expert. Is it about half? Okay.
If 4% times $1,000,006 would be 64,000. So if you've got 11,000 times 12, that'd be 132. So it's about half and half.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me. Another question or comment?
I have a couple of comments. First of all, some of the people in the 73 families that gave the $207,000 beyond their pledge, they said, we did that hoping to have it applied to principal and reduce the entire interest on the loan and one thing or another. So they would be very disappointed to see that move into just the general fund.
It's good. We've heard that.
Another comment I have, is, you know, when you talk about some people only giving to the building fund, not to the general fund, that means they're disappointed in the way the operation is running. They don't want to leave the church, but they're disappointed in all of the expenses. Maybe it's administrative salaries. Maybe we're top heavy.
Can I just
And then-
interrupt you? I think that's kind of a leap. And that's a dangerous assumption to make.
Well,
And
yes.
I think, and I want to set the tone for this.
I'm
We've
just
had,
making that
I will,
comment.
I'll let you finish, I promise. If somebody has concerns about what's going on in the church, we gotta start sharing those concerns with the people you have
That's
concerns with,
correct.
not having us make assumptions or have to read into stuff. Thank you, go forward.
Okay, now, the other items in there, first of all, computers are good, but they're controlling our life. And today I looked at, during offering, the last thing to do was number 4, come to church. What do you think of that?
I don't know,
Online-
the last thing of what?
Online giving is good, but it also says, hey, I did my part, so I don't have to come today.
Well, there are a lot of trends.
That's just, yeah.
If
but
you
it's
read
an
the, if
idea
you read
I'm
the
throwing
Fargo
back at
paper,
you guys.
this week, there's extensive articles being written almost every month about church attendance worldwide, countrywide.
Oh, yes.
It's not just our problem here, and that's a world that we face, and that's the environment that we have to take these challenges on.
There is no question that the younger generation does not hold the religious community in the same light as our forefathers, as our parents, and as we as older members of the congregation. You know, and I'm not saying this because I'm unhappy with what you're saying or unhappy with the committee, but basically, just pointing those items out. Maybe somebody's got better ideas than that, and that's great. One other item I've always felt when I've looked at our annual meeting report, when you go down your list of funds, we have too many little funds that are doing nothing.
Right, we've
And
talked.
I agree with, should they go to the general fund, should they go to the principal book? But those little funds really should not
Okay.
exist.
Thank you.
So
So
thank
back to your, to the specific generic to the, or germane to the building fund, your suggestion is it should be applied to the loan principal balance, correct?
At least the 69,000.
Okay, all right.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead, Sharon.
I'm not going to cry, but I'm almost crying. Because it's exactly what we talked about at the annual meeting potentially happening. So now going back to what we were talking about now. The Synod has had the very same problem with designated funds. And the way we've solved that problem is simplifying the process. People, when they give designated funds, have a very intentional purpose for that fund. But what we're doing is we're spending down those funds for that purpose. So if there's a fund called food baskets, make sure that every fall that food basket money is expended. Make sure that the quilters funding is expended. Make sure that you have documentation to go along with it, and there's no problem in going through the designated funds that way. And that's perfectly acceptable by the church council, just like the synod council. If you get into larger issues, you may have to go to the synod assembly or to the annual meeting. The other issue that I have is the committee that you are now formed, has that been designated and approved by the church council?
Yes,
Okay, and you are officially appointed?
yes.
Okay, I'm looking at you, okay, because that's also important for the audit, to make sure that you have people that are officially designated for that purpose. So that's my advice from the synod. And then also remember These discussions are not easy. They're very difficult. And so it becomes emotional. And that's why I'm sitting back here with tears in my eyes. So thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Keith?
The question I have is, why would we want to get rid of that designated fund that we have established already for the building? Why can't we make just payments out of that? And people that want to give to that building fund can still do that. People that want to go to work and give to the regular offering to operational can do that. It gives you the option as a person that's donating of where you want your money to go. Is there a negative to that, is what I'm asking.
You know, that's not for me to decide. I mean, I think I've done this analysis. I've lived in this budget for the last 2 months. Basically, a month, you know, we know that the loan payment's about $11,000 a month. Our other expenses are roughly $45,000 a month, somewhere in there, $50,000 a month. So if you wanted to, say, give 20% of your tithe to the building fund and 80% to the general fund, in a rough way of speaking, very unscientific, that'd be kind of meeting our obligations on a monthly basis. And we certainly can do that, but I don't think there's necessarily any downside to that. The question would come up then, what if we set it up to make those payments out of the building fund? What if there aren't $11,000 in there to make that? Then we have to come up with provisions. Or the flip side, what if all of a sudden we got $150,000 in there? Do we just leave it there as the piggy bank for future payments? Or do we put it back to handle some of our operating expenses? That's the tricky part. But love the feedback, you know?
That's the part that I wanted to know.
Yeah.
What about taking the building fund proceeds and putting it towards the loan? You could do it actually and pay ahead.
Oh.
And that would give you some financial flexibility. You could still have it as part of your operational budget, but if you're ever short, then that would not be an expense that would come out of the operational expense. And then all the building fund proceeds that people make could all go towards additional payments. It's still all those additional payments that go towards principal or reduce it quicker, but it gives you more flexibility on an operational basis. You could still have the financial discipline to keep budgeting and make monthly payments, but if you're paid ahead a year, if things are short, you can wait a month or 2 months, you're still ahead.
The interest would still accumulate during a month when there's no payment made, correct?
It would, but if you're, the thinking hopefully would be that, not that you'd forego payments every month, the
Just
thing
whenever.
would be keep making payments, but all those extra payments would all go, there'd be a little bit of interest, but all the rest of it would be a further principal reduction. And right now, if you took $60,000, obviously 55,000 of it would be a reduction of principal, which would reduce your ongoing interest going forward.
Sure.
And it gives you, if you do it as paying ahead, it gives you more financial flexibility.
Andrew, do you have any reaction to that from a finance committee standpoint?
No, I mean, I think that's where we're looking at those options.
Okay. So all are doable. Peter, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, I did. First, just thank you all for doing this. This is really important work, and the information you're sharing is very clear, more clear than I've seen before, and so very, very helpful, and it leads to good dialogue. I think part of the story that we still could carry out is to say what do we look like in 2024 or in 2025, and make try to do some different scenarios and different projections, because I think that will, if we look out into the future, that'll help us make the best decisions with our resources today. So I would encourage to look at, kind of take those assumptions out and go out a few years, and then we can run different scenarios that will help all of us as members make decisions about our giving as well.
Thank you. You know, I'm hoping, Ryan and I have spent some time, as he generated this report, he's also talked about some financial ratios about like how many days worth of cash on hand do we have? Some of those kinds of things. Other ways that we necessarily haven't looked at what we're doing, and we're gonna try to do some more of that into the future. So that we can look forward. Yes, sir.
I was part of,
No, you're on.
okay, I was part of that building committee that was part of figuring out what do we need to build and you know, costs and all the rest of that. As we did that, one of the things that continues to keep sticking in my brain is that we repeatedly told you as a congregation from the committee that what we didn't want to have happen was to build a building that would then jeopardize our ministry. So we don't, so that's a piece of what we said. We don't want that to happen. And so the whole premise of what we need to do, and I know I shared this with you before, and I understand that not every person can do this, but it roughly comes to, if you did not increase your giving by 15 to 18% from what you were giving before this building project, we wouldn't meet the loan and we wouldn't meet the operational expenses. So that's, I mean, just so for food for thought, is that when you look at your giving compared to what you were doing before the building project started, after we built the building, you need to increase that by 15 to 18%, whatever that number happens to be. And I realize not everybody can do that, so then the onus comes back to those that can give more. They need to do that to help those who can't. And that's the whole thing of going forward, to be able to do the ministry we wish to do, because there's no point in having bricks and mortar if you're not doing the ministry you intended to do when you got done.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate everybody's feedback. I guess I probably feel like a little bit more of a leaning towards some application towards the loan in some methodology, but kind of maybe keeping the building fund open and developing some strategy going forward as to have those building fund dollars applied to loans at certain intervals or something like that. These are conversations we'll have at the church council level, and thank you for your input. I just want to remind you of a couple of things. We raised more than we expected to, and we did it in unbelievably historic times. The church was shut down for 2 or 3 months, you know, and we had people worshiping from home, and we still hit that goal right out of the park. And now we're coming through that on the other side. We've got so many positive things going for us. The energy is here, the capacity is here. Most of why we're sharing this information is just to remind us all that we're all in this together. We're a congregation going forth at God's calling, ready to share His resources to make positive things happen at Trinity. Roger, you got one more? You want to say something?
Yes, please. If you take out the sheet that I passed out to you, on the front side where you have the graph, where it shows all of the expenses, this one is accurate. The back side is a little bit of rounding off. This just says how much was given each month starting in 2019. You'll start, remember that the whole thing was supposed to kick off on the 1st of October, and that's where the big amounts start. But some people started their pledge, for example, the $5,000 in August. That was somebody's pledge, and I want that on to be credited to my account. So I just went back to the beginning of the year when people were starting to give a little bit. The right-hand column is just the amount for each month. But I was struck at the end of June, when I did my report, that we had received 1.6 million in receipts, and we owe 1.6 million, the number you see down at the bottom. So we were halfway home. On the backside, okay, the amount of the pledges, these numbers were up on the screen, I guess. For those people who pledged, they've given the 1.354677. 46 families with unpaid pledges. But they have a balance. They've all paid some. Some of these people left the church. Jolene and Peter Gallatin left the church. Bob and Bev Pacell left the church. Amdal.
Please don't say names.
Well, I'm just saying, these are people that, some died. W. Ray. Cheryl Hovland. Some people are still paying on their pledge. Monthly. I will continue to have the building fund on the giving statement. And I went into the computer before I sent out the giving statement at the end of April, and I changed the expiration date of the pledges that weren't yet fulfilled. So hopefully to the end of the year, because then their giving statement at the end of the year will say paid in full. Not all of them, of course. The 45 families there with non-pledged gifts, some of those are just summer people. Some of them, I'm quite sure, were people who just took the wrong envelope out of the box. It was the first one for the month. And so I put it in the building. That's the envelope they put it in. That's where it went. Some were just non-members. We had one non-member, $2,000. Another, somebody, $500. Somebody else, 10. Maybe got it out of the pew rack. 55 families paid their in full and have stopped. We have several people who are doing transfer from accounts every month or every week, automatically coming into the building fund. You're going to cut them off? I don't think so. I think we want to keep this money coming designated. Let people have their choice of where they give the money. They might want to give it to the whatever this is coming up in August for sandwiches or bread for the world. You know, you give the people more opportunity to give, more categories. Although I wonder about the mission support every week in the bulletin. 75 families have paid additional. You've got that $207,070. That's people that are continuing to give or gave ahead of time. Any questions? Yeah?
I just want to say the word trust. Let's trust our people that know what they're doing. I trust the accountants. I trust you people that you know how to do this. And I love the fact that we've got input. But if we start nitpicking where every dollar goes, and if I all of a sudden have to write to you and tell you where I want my money to go, I'm not going to do that. I want you to decide. I don't want to have somebody say, well, I'm not going to give to this fund because they don't treat me right. I just want the word trust. We give our money to this church. We elect people to be on the council and these committees, and thank you, because I didn't know that this committee wasn't, doing all of this, because that's a lot on your plate.
Well, thank you. For
yeah,
that.
That's
Thank
all.
you. And I do want to emphasize that I'm speaking on behalf of both the church council and the Time, Talents, and Treasures Committee. That Time, Talents, Treasures, the time and treasures is a big part of what we talk about, not just about money. And Kim will get to that shortly here as we wrap things up. Ryan.
Yeah, Brent, I just wanted to support what Keith said, as well as that for those that gave to the building fund, I guess as a donor to that fund, whether those contributions go towards paying one of the contractor bills or it's used for the debt service as we continue on with that $1.6 million loan, to me is an acceptable use of that fund to be able to pay that debt service. And then I just wanted to ask, the cash that we have, do we know what interest rate we're earning on that passbook account? I don't know, Steve, if you know, is that a couple percent perhaps?
I have no idea.
I believe there's one account, but I think it's 2.5%.
2.5, okay. So I mean, there's a little bit of a differential there between our 4% loan and the 2.5%. Obviously, you know, one thing that you think of when you're using cash to pay down debt is that you lose some of the flexibility to pay for ongoing operating expenses. And so I really like the way Steve suggested, you know, perhaps that we pay it and do it as a prepayment so that it'll go to pay down some of the principal, but it'll also give us the flexibility if we run into a pinch either with additional operating expenses a couple months down the road or diminished contributions for whatever reason. You have that flexibility, you know, that financial flexibility, and you're still gaining on that little bit of a differential between our 4% debt and the 2.5% that we're earning on the money.
Okay, thank you. One last one, because we got to get you out of here, my gosh. It's art in the park, for crying out loud.
I'm probably naive about this whole thing, but I paid my pledge, but if I gave money in memory of someone who dies to the building fund, or if I know of someone who has not completed their pledge and said that they want to do that, I just assumed, and that's where my naivety comes in, that we borrowed that money for the building fund. So if I give my money to the building fund, why doesn't it go to the loan? That's my question.
That's why we're here.
Yes.
Because really, the council can't
No, and-
unilaterally.
yeah, I
I
didn't
mean, we don't
realize-
spend the building fund amounts unless there's some prescribed plan for how
Okay,
we're gonna do it.
I was not aware that it was two different pockets,
Yeah.
so that if I
That's the
gave
tricky
money
part.
for the building
Of the
fund.
designated fund versus the operating
Yeah,
fund,
and
that's a
I
big
would-
leap, and it's not easy to
would just,
understand.
I would just assume that it would go towards the loan because the loan was made for the building,
Okay.
so.
Thank you, thank you. All right, I'm gonna have Kim come up here and put a bow on this thing. We thank you for your input. It's important, and we will have prayerful, diligent discussion in our council meetings to come. Look for more information coming out to you on a regular basis, and here's Kim.
And I'm going to be quick. I'm Kim Westholter. My family and I moved here about 2 years ago, almost exactly. We have 2 boys, and the second time we came here, it was Rally Sunday, and they fell head over heels in love with Laura and Susie, which is why we became members here. We went to Good Shepherd and Moorhead, and we had so many people recommend Trinity. And we really wanted to find a place where we could get involved, which is why I'm on the council in my second year here, and also on our Time Treasures and Towns team, which I like the extra T. So a couple of you already did a good job leading into my closing, so thank you for that. Essentially, we do want to do exactly as Peter suggested, be more transparent on our budget, where it's going, and how we can all be more planful moving forward. So as a council, we've talked about moving up that planning process earlier to September. I think it's just a bit earlier than previous years. But really working with the committees to be very planful and looking at the year, what do they actually need? Like, it's always nice to add a little extra what you want, but what do you need to do the ministry that you have? So we want to start those conversations early so that we can bring this conversation back to the church in October and let you know, here's what 2024 looks like. I love the idea of looking ahead to 2025, so that's something we can definitely consider. And as Brent said earlier, we have a lot of ministry that we want to do in the community and the larger world as well. And we need to really be thoughtful of what our budget looks like and how we're using those funds, all of us individually as well as the church. So that's going to be part of our ongoing conversation as well. And then we've got a lot of things coming up to also hopefully make this fun and bring people back to church. A couple of you mentioned, attendance has gotten down. We're still coming out of the pandemic, I think, it feels like. Rally Sunday is coming up. The Time Treasures and Talents Committee is going to be calling all of the members to invite them to that party, the celebration. We want everybody to come back. People that we haven't seen, people that we have seen, everybody the same. so that we can get them to come here and learn ways that they can get involved. There's Time, Treasures, and Talents speaks to a few of the different ways. There's online, you can sign up for those different volunteering opportunities, so we want to make sure that people know where that is. So that's really it. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for sharing your opinions. If you didn't want to speak up, but you want to share that opinion later, you can certainly reach out to the council, share with Pastor Megan or the office, and we'd be happy to take your feedback. So enjoy your Sunday.